across the border. Yeah, it's a good business. Good things going.
Okay. I don't know that much about the market.
Yeah.
200. That's all. $1 million. Whatever. I can't remember exactly. That's. We're at. Yeah.
It'd be one of the bigger greater market in May.
The summer.
I don't see it. Family really get into the schools. They start getting on.
Like we were.
Thank you all for being here. I am. I'm assuming they can hear me on the live stream. Pat, can you hear us okay?
We could hear you guys on the live stream. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we're good to go then. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks to everybody for showing up, and we will be recording this. So be careful what you say in this world. Anyhow, this is a friend of mine that passed away just a few weeks ago in February. Jane Franklin, an incredible historian, a Cuba historian, wrote several books. This book particularly is the one that I use as kind of a Bible. It's a chronology of everything that's occurred before the 59 revolution all the way up to close to 2000, date by date. So it's really well documented and a great resource. She also opened so many doors for me in my visits to Cuba. I went to Cuba some 7 or 8 times. Last time I was down here was in 2015, including connecting me with the president of the National Assembly, Ricardo Alarcon. You may have heard of him. He was also for 10 or 11 years the Cuban ambassador to the UN. And then seeing him and doing some videos with him, interviews over a few years, he opened some doors to me. I was able to visit the Center for Immunology, meet with their top scientists. Just a fascinating country, Cuba. We think of the blockade because it's such a terrible thing, but informationally, it's an asphyxiating blockade. Our impressions of Cuba, I would urge you to consider them to be based on incomplete information. Anyhow, with that being said, this is her book. This is her website. This is, let me see if I can get this going on here. Actually, I think I got the wrong.
Something.
What? Wait. I think I did this thing. Oh, that's not your remote. This is not your. Just turn this off. Okay, I'll get us back. Okay, thanks. Well, that's about part of the course. I got to. Anyhow, so we'll just. So anyhow, Jane passed away. She's married to someone you may know. I don't know if you know Bruce. They were married for 67 years. He's from Rutgers. They were involved in all the anti-war stuff from Stanford. He's a prolific author on so many different topics, and he lost his wife after 67 years of marriage. So anyhow. We're going to wait for just a second for this to come up and we'll get going.
This is a new feature that you're going to introduce for your getting light into darkness.
Say again?
This is a new feature you're going to introduce for your radio show.
Well, actually, yeah. This is, as you all know, I think from the invitation, this is the anniversary of the Bay of Pigs invasion. And so that's what we're going to focus on topically wise. And a separately connected Bay of Pigs presentation will also be on Monday's show. But let me just maybe talk about that for a second. The actual Bay of Pigs today is the 15th of April. And back in 1961 was the preliminary bombing of Cuba's Air Force. Cuba had a massive Air Force of close to a dozen planes. Old T-33s, Sea Furies. And so one of the things the Cuban government under, Fidel Castro is a pretty astute military leader. They hid their planes. They rolled out their older planes that were not working and that type of thing. And they struck those. And I think they got a couple of their planes, but at the end of the day, on the 15th was the preliminary attack to try to wipe out the Air Force so then they could have the landing at the Bay of Pigs on the 17th, 2 days later. It went a whole day or two without anything going on. And Fidel was saying they're going to land somewhere. We're not sure. And so they're trying to figure all that out. So that's what occurred. 2 days later on the 17th was the landing. The other thing I'll just mention real quick is that what was crucial, according to the military experts in Cuba and Fidel Castro, was that they needed to defeat this incursion within 72 hours. The USS Essex, huge aircraft carrier, was out there. They did not lend the air support on the second day that they were going to. But in addition to the Essex, the OAS, the Organization of American States, which is pretty much controlled by the US at that time, we're going to formally recognize this beachhead government. So, you have an invasion. If you could just hold this land for, 72 hours, then you're going to have the OAS recognize the deal. Then the US would come in and support, and if necessary, the whole invasion thing would unfold. So they were defeated. They were defeated in 66 hours, actually. And we're going to be showing you pictures of all of those interacting events and such. And looks like we got it. Great. You see it there, up left-hand corner? From beginning? First, I have to share the screen. Up there. Yeah. Right.
Comes in.
After 3 days. So
Anyhow,
you want to reach
how about just a quick hand for Steve? He overcame Pedro Gatos. Snafu. Thank you, Steve, so much. And also, I should more formally thank the Friends of Austin Meeting Place for their generous making this place available. And anyhow, so this is Jane Franklin. This is her book. Also, Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera is sponsoring this event as well. They do visits down to the border on a regular basis. So their website and phone numbers up there. And wanted to thank them for their generous endorsement of this presentation. We've worked together in the past, and we've actually had a previous Cuba presentation here about a decade or so ago. But we'll move on. So this is a little picture. I thought it was important to kind of symbolize this nonprofit we're unveiling. Okay, this Pedro Gatos Institute on Addiction, Health, and Social Care. This is from Havana many years ago. It's a picture I saw in front of a bookstore in Cuba, in Havana. and there's Charlie Chaplin, bookstore closed, and it's kind of how our media and information world is today. If you want to get really good information, well, that store's closed. You have to search around for it, and hopefully this institute will be part of a place to stop along the way. Anyhow, we start with the following premises: that there's too much misery in the world. Some of the misery is unavoidable and generated from natural forces of nature, but the vast majority of it is created by human behavior and the mismanagement of resources by our species and such. Therefore, because it's created by our species, it can be prevented and reversed, and that's what our interest is. And the main driver of human misery is gross wealth inequality. And through time, there's been different ways that has come about, through slavery, and after slavery, kind of, the whole post-colonial, neo-colonialist period and all that. But all of these result in a gross wealth inequality. You're going to have it, but the levels of it are just egregious, off the charts, incomprehensible, really. And here's some documentation of that. This is from the Oxfam report back in 2020. The richest 1% of the world have more than double the wealth of 6.9 million people. And among that 1% are some billionaires. And they alone, 2,000 of them, had the equivalent wealth of 4.6 billion people. Women and girls put in 12.5 billion hours of unpaid work every single day. This is 2019 data here. So they're able. You can check out the methodology by going to Oxfam and also this International Labor Organization that put out this 12.5 billion hours of unpaid work. What does that mean? Well, it translates into a monetary value of some 11 trillion dollars a year. So, where does that money go? It's not going to these women, so figure it out. It goes to this egregious wealth inequality calculus, if you will. Okay, and so there's too much preventable misery, and I don't want to read word for word with this deal, but this was a more recent data in our own country in 2021. 68% of the total wealth of our country was owned by the top 10%, while the lowest 50% earned only 3.3% of that wealth. The top 1% own nearly the same as the bottom 90%, each about 32% of the pie. Okay. And I think it's wealth matters. To just jump up and scream about, oh, it's all unequal and all that. But there's all sorts of data. This is just one example. In 2016, Brookings Institute study analyzed life expectancies for men that were among the top 10% of earners versus those that were the bottom 10%. These were men that were born in 1950. And the life expectancy was some 14 years shorter. So you can imagine, that when you talk about wealth inequality, you're talking about egregious levels of poverty and injustices that actually kill. But they are reversible. So that's what, and these sources of all this stuff is on these slides, which will be available to you after this deal. Just moving on. So we're going to present a vignette on the Bay of Pigs and paying homage to Jane Franklin. Again, in our efforts to bring light into darkness, we live in a universe of information that has so much disinformation, and trying to sort that out is not easy. As of 2020, 90% of our media is controlled by 6 corporations. I mean, think about that for a minute. And the total value of those corporations is well over $400 billion. So in a real sense, it means 90% of the information that's made available to us is being generated probably by interests that really don't want to change the status quo because they're doing so well. And so that's what happens with the centralization and monopolization of information. And so that's basically what many of you all may be familiar with Jim Morrison, who who wrote the famous words, "Whoever controls the media controls the mind." And so that's dangerous. One of my favorite authors from many years ago was Herbert Marcuse. He wrote a number of books. One is The One-Dimensional Man, and he just talked about a closed universe of information. He didn't say 90% of the corporations or 90% of the media is owned by 6 corporations, but he just said that the status quo controls information in such a way that it doesn't allow critical information in there to maybe break down and look at things a little bit differently. And he called that a universe of informational discourse and one-dimensional. The fact that if we get one-dimensional information, we become one-dimensional. Okay, and just shout this deal, this closed universe of informational discourse means that it makes it more difficult to analyze and critically deconstruct what's going on, which, of course, George Orwell talked about, I think, most eloquently in his writings. Lastly, just as this introduction to the Institute, we want you to think about the Institute as a library of well-vetted information that seeks to push back against what we just described, okay? The unfairnesses. And we provide well-resourced information. I've been with Co-op Radio the last 20 plus years, doing a lot of different shows, but they're all kind of focused on world events, world historical scenarios that are so misrepresented in our own historical presentations, growing up and going to school and in most ways and such. And we felt like in order to provide a very well-resourced type of history that's very well documented so that you can go and look at the documentation as well, is really, really important. So that's what we're trying to do, is trying to earn your trust by examining what we said. In fact, if you go back over the last 20 years, we talked about, just one quick example. I don't know if you remember, but in 2008, Georgia was attacked by Russia, right? And we were told that it was an unprovoked Russian aggression to Georgia. Well, I was reading documentations from people in that area and looking at live video and all that, and they were saying South Ossetia, which was being attacked by Georgia, in civilian areas, they were just launching these mortars and all sorts of military hardware into there. Hundreds of people were dying. Some Russian peacekeepers died. A bunch of people died, and then Russia came in and pushed back. Well, all we got from John McCain, who was running for president, Barack Obama, who was running for president in 2008, was how this naked aggression by Russia. And it turns out a year later, or even before a year later, within months, the organization, the OSCE, was a monitoring agency, international, 50 nations or such. They were in the vicinity. They put out a report pretty much confirming what we were suggesting might be the building. We didn't know for sure, but we knew when they said with absolute certainty, this is what was happening, we knew it was an absolute certainty, that there was absolute doubt. And in fact, the EU came out a year later in 2009 with a massive report after a long study by this Heidi Tagliavani, I think was the main person involved with that. And it said basically that it was Georgia under Saakashvili that unprovokingly just started the whole thing, and then Russia responded. And did they respond with extra force? Maybe so. But someone comes into your house and steals your, something from you, and you chase them down. Anyhow, you get the idea. So that's just what I'm trying. The reason I use that deal is because there's so many other shows in which we came out and people were criticizing us at the time for not being more forceful against our enemies and that type of thing. But over time, we've shown to be much closer to the truth. Nobody owns the truth, but that's what we're trying to do, an honest attempt to get at the truth, okay? This is the nonprofit board, and and again, you can go to this website to get more information about these. It is so humbling to be part of this group of people. Dr. Sahimi is at the University of Southern California. He's from Iran. He left Iran during the Green Revolution there. So he's very critical of Iran and their government. Yet he has provided incredible information to show that our policies towards Iran are completely wrong. You know, you could actually have both, right? And he's very, very well documented in that area, published a lot. Kent Anschutz, who's here tonight. Kent is from Austin, Texas. He's an attorney and worked in human rights and women's rights issues for decades and such. Aisha Juman, she's got a master's in public health and a PhD, and she's from Yemen and immensely involved in that part of the world and brings that expertise. Mike Whitney is like a geopolitical journalist. He writes pretty regularly, someone I followed for a long time. And I asked him to join, and he graciously accepted. One of our former co-op volunteers, Evan Michael Solis, he got his master's in journalism up at Columbia and does videography. And then there's some people that are not pictured here. Patricia Bucco is one of our board members and our secretary as well. And that kind of rounds out our 7 board members. Dr. William Garrity is one of the most prolific racial justice minds. He works out of Duke, and he is been kind enough to consult in those areas as well, because we're going to have a whole area. We're really very interested in that as well. And then Jacob Bucco, he's our head of our special operations. So him and Pat have been doing a lot of, and maybe Jacob are doing a lot of our transcribing of shows and that type of stuff. So that's what's going to be, coming to the Institute. And George is our art consultant, and he actually did a wonderful job with our T-shirts. But anyhow, I just wanted to turn it over to Pat for a second for just a couple of introductory comments, and then we'll move to our page things. Pat, can you hear us all right? I'll take that some
I'm
There you
not
are.
sure. This is Jacob. I don't know if Pat can get her mic on right now, but I could do what she would have said
Yeah.
right now. Yeah, so the website is up and running as of today, and all the information on the board members should be up there. Access to the archive that we have of information, including the shows, the audio, the transcriptions will be going up there as well. And eventually we hope to have a donate button on there as well. But that is not currently up there, and no pressure in donating in any way. We're here for the information, and that's what you'll get on that website. I think that's all.
And so the vision is to have like a library. I'm old school, but I remember you go in the library, there's a card catalog. You go through the card catalog to find, whatever, Libya 2011 invasion, and there'd be a whole section on that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not just a bunch of transcripts and audio clips, but they're going to be broken out into subject matters and stuff. And so ultimately, with the source, it's huge. Without sourcing, anybody can put together a story that might be true, but getting back to what primary sourcing for journalism is all about is what this website will be about. Anyhow, we'll move on. And by the way, if there's any questions, we'll have some questions right after this presentation. But I really appreciate y'all being here today. So thank you very much. So anyhow, this is it's an informational nonprofit. That's what we are. And that's just the date, By the way, that's a picture of Fidel jumping off the tank at the Bay of Pigs. You know, we have presidents like George Bush that send people to slaughter in Iraq, and how many other wars and unjust wars. Now we're getting smart. We send other people's people to do our wars, so they don't have to play the political costs back at home for them. But here, you know, I just think it's interesting that somebody has so much investment that they're willing to put their life on the line. You know, they're at the front. There's stories, eyewitness stories, and many, many books and things that they're saying, you know, get out of here, get out of here. You know, bombs going on, literally. There are bombs in the neighborhood. You know, they're not, you know, one of those photo op type things. And he says, no, you know, we lose this revolution if you don't start this deal within, like you were saying earlier, within 72 hours. So April 15th was the airstrikes. This is, by the way, President Al Khan in one of our videos. What I particularly loved about him is his English was impeccable because my Spanish is terrible. And I'm embarrassed. And when I'm in Cuba, everyone says, God, you look Cuban, but you can't speak a lick of Spanish. You know, but anyhow, he can speak English eloquently. He taught me so much in these interviews that we'll be making available. Real quick, when you go to Cuba, there's a revolutionary museum of the revolution. And you go up the steps, the first thing you see is what? Abraham Lincoln. You see all of these international social justice heroes, because that's what they're really trying to promote themselves. And they adore the American people. I can tell you that with absolute sincerity. They abhor U.S. government policy. They adore the U.S. people. I don't know if you remember the Elian Gonzalez deal, right? Remember the young boy that tried to come across? Well, he came across with his mom that had divorced his dad, and she died, and he's in the States, and his dad wants his son back. She had kidnapped his son. And, you know, you had these great uncles in Miami that wanted to keep him here, and it became this political football. And the American public just said, well, wait a minute, you know, if his dad is alive and over here and wants his son, he should get his son. They just were really enamored by the compassion and intelligence and humanity of the American public. So wanted to kind of just separate out those two things. Anyhow, so that's the significance of the Bay of Pigs. I'm going to get up a little bit closer because I can't see too well. But one purpose is to learn about the nature of our policies and really about how our government does not tell the truth to us. It's been a long, long history, and why we continue to believe them without verifying it is something that just befuddles me. But the Bay of Pigs, it sought to overthrow this government that was had just overthrown the Batista government in 1959, and the Batista government, obviously, as you probably know, had endorsed a situation where the land was almost solely owned by foreign interests and all the industries were. So they get overthrown. What we're going to see here real quick is that the deception of the U.S. public was so stark. And you deceive the American public because the existing status quo, when you had such abject poverty in Cuba under Batista, was that there's great investment abilities and great investment monies being taken out and such. And so that's the carrot, so to speak. But we can't say that. We have to say that you know, it's a communist deal, and try to get people into this, you know, communism kind of without really looking at what I think democracy is mainly about. What's best for the majority population seems to me to be a simple explanation of what democracy is. So anyhow, what we find when we study Cuba is that following the revolution, you know, and since life expectancy, literacy rates, access to healthcare, proper nutrition, access to education. All of these things are measurables. This is not propaganda. You can measure it. You can compare it to other nations throughout Latin America and to our nation. They got longer life expectancy than we do in this country, despite the embargo. So anyhow, that's not really what this is about. This is what it's about. The exile force of Cubans that made up the force that landed at the Bay of Pigs on April 17th were defeated within 72 hours, about 68 hours, I think, after the land invasion. And the members of this group of Cuban exiles that had landed, among them, this is from Jane's documentation, among the 1,000+ prisoners are men that had previously owned some 1 million acres of land, 9,666 houses, 70 factories, 5 mines, not mines, I'm sorry, that's a misprint, 2 banks, and 10 sugar mills. In other words, this was the first invasion force of sorts that were really the bourgeoisie, if you would, the people that were really well vetted. In fact, when they did the land reform, just a side note, it included Cubans and Western investment people. I mean, Fidel's own family, his dad got his land expropriated, or part of it expropriated and stuff. This is not something that is really told. This is when I go down there, I always took a bunch of baseballs. Cubans love baseball, and so do I. And you hand out these balls, and I'm telling you, they think you're some kind of, great person. And so that's what that is here. It's just handing out a baseball to a couple kids. Anyhow, they have a lot of demonstrations bringing Elian Gonzalez back, or May Day demonstrations, or whatever it is. And you see Abraham Lincoln among other caricatures out there in the deal. So I thought that was interesting to include in there. I need to pick it up here. So let me just. Okay. So anyhow, the main thing when you hear the presentation of the Bay of Pigs is that JFK refused to bring in that second strike force of airplanes. He refused to. He wanted to. He had told the CIA that this was going to be a secret invasion. We wanted the U.S. hand kept out of it, and all of that. But the idea, I just put up here. I don't know if you're familiar, but Haiti is a country that got its independence in 1804. Okay, and it was the first successful black slave revolt. France, it was their colony before that, Saint Dominique, and they made a killing. It was the wealthiest colony in the history of the West up until that time. That's how France made its wealth accumulation of the backs of folks in Saint Dominique. And in fact, they were losing this deal. Napoleon was. The UK came to their aid. Spain came to their aid. All the colonial masters came to their aid with their forces because they knew if there was a successful slave revolt there would be successful slave revolts likely in other parts of the Western Hemisphere, and that these other people were invested in. But despite that, they won this deal, and even the United States was involved. In 1804, we were a very weak but growing military power. In fact, in 1823, with the Monroe Doctrine, we announced to all of the European colonizers that, look, this hemisphere is ours. And that's really how we started to, move forward with all that and such. But despite all of that, the Haitian revolt succeeded. And I bring that up because they almost were completely devastated, the indigenous people. I mean, they were, if you can think about that, millions of people were just gone. And the whole land was torched. It was just a horrific genocide of sorts. And finally, France figured out, if we keep going on, there's not going to be any reason to even have this place. So they, succumbed Haiti got its independence. And within 20 years, Haiti had warships by Haiti saying, you have to pay us reparations because you took away our slave economy. And they actually had to pay those, and they paid, billions of dollars in that. But I guess the point I'm trying to get to here in a roundabout way is that we could have succeeded at the Bay of Pigs, but I am telling you, over 70%, according to the CIA statistics and documentation, were 100% behind this revolution. And the reason they were because they were already getting immense benefits that we mentioned: school, education, health, literacy campaigns. I was in the Bay of Pigs area many times, and a friend of mine that I met there showed me a picture where he's turning on water. They didn't have water until after the revolution. Yeah, that type of thing. So everyone was behind this deal, and to suggest that I would suggest that they would have fought to the last man and woman, that type of thing. So that's really not well reported. Okay. So anyhow, with before we get into the, maybe I should move over here because I'm getting similar to here. This is the President Eisenhower. He approves of a plan, and this plan, I just highlighted a couple of things because I wanted to get back to that theme about how we are deceived as U.S. citizens by our government. These goals were to be achieved in a manner as to avoid the appearance of a U.S. intervention. I mean, right from the deal, that's what we want. We want to keep this from the American public and create a public relations, other reasons for our actions and that type of thing. Okay. Along those lines, Eisenhower, he becomes president in 1953, as you probably know, and the urging of his Secretary of State at the time, John Foster Dulles, they initiated that coup of Mossadegh, the elected president in Iran in 1953. So this is the first. Let me just get this up here because it's kind of interesting here. So there's Mossadegh, democratically elected. And this is interesting. Again, was bolded. Eisenhower's decision to use the CIA as a blunt instrument of political intervention marked a break from our previous policies with the CIA. The CIA had previously been used just to collect intelligence. Now it was going to be used, and forever on was going to be used to subjugate other types of countries that we felt needed to be subjugated. Okay, so that's what that is. Eisenhower, the United Fruit Company, what's really important is that one of the reasons we went into the Bay of Pigs was our incredible success with the Iran coup and then the Guatemalan coup in 1954. So this is a Guatemalan coup, and what's not really well known, I think it's pretty well known, but in 1945, the first democratically elected administration, Arevalo, came to power. All sorts of land reform starts happening and positive things, and the first democratically elected government, and then Jacoby Arbenz follows him as the second one in 1951. And the United Fruit Company was hugely immersed in this area, and they not just owned a bunch of land in Guatemala, but over the years they would undervalue the value of their land. And when Arbenz finally did this land reform, he says, "We're going to pay you what you said your land was worth on your tax returns for the last couple of decades." I said, "You can't do that. It's worth a lot more. Having your cake and eat it too type of thing." But the reason this is up here, it also is we'll be talking more about it on the radio show on Monday, but we document how United Fruit influenced the White House and our government. And really, it's almost like our government works for United Fruit. You had John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State. You had Allen Dulles, his brother, who was the CIA director. Both of them were hugely connected to a law firm that represented banking interests. that worked along with United Fruits on the railroad, all of them, and as well as the all of the land and such. And on top of that, there's the secretary, her name is escaping me, but the secretary's husband was the public relations director of United Fruit. And then you had Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a huge stockholder and the U.S. ambassador at the time, talking about how Guatemala was going communist. They weren't going communist. They were just redistributing land that had resulted in this abject poverty. If you know anything about Guatemala, after this coup happened in 1954, for 3 or 4 decades, through the 80s, it was one of the most horrific places in the world to live. Over 200,000 Guatemalans were slaughtered, predominantly Mayan Indians and such. And all of that was to try to keep this investment climate intact. Okay. Anyhow, so with that being said, this is May 2nd. This is just to give you an idea of the support that the Bay of Pigs galvanized Cuba as well. They all saw, all of Latin America saw it for what it was. And this is a few weeks later, May 2nd, 1961. I think this is again, there is all sorts of really documented data that show you what was going on. This is Eisenhower noted that he was prepared to move against Castro before Kennedy's inauguration if a really good excuse was provided. And they wouldn't provide that. And so some of them could be manufactured, is what he's saying. Perhaps we could think of manufacturing something that would be generally accepted. Like a false flag. I mean, that's basically what that is, right? And to use covert action specifically, the language was to fabricate events to achieve this purpose, So this next couple of slides, I just wanted to show you, this is a memo, 62 memo that goes through these different operations. Operation Bingo was a fake attack, a plan to have a fake attack on a US base from Guantanamo. Oh, they attacked us, therefore we're going to attack them. That was going to be the precipitating thing. Operation Dirty Trick, back, some of us are old enough. My friend Steve is here, and I remember John Glenn going up into space. 1962. Well, NASA was not sure how that was going to work out. John Glenn is a hero of sorts because there was no guarantees that he was going to return. Although anyhow, this Operation Dirty Trick says, well, if he doesn't return, let's blame it on Castro. Let's blame it on Cuba. That was actually in language and stuff. Operation Mongoose, of course, was a full-fledged invasion type thing, and it accompanied all sorts of terrorist attacks that occurred from 59. I mean, after the revolution of 59, on into 60, 61, into the early 60s and stuff. So you can look this up for yourself. The amount of sabotage that went on. They introduced different types of fungus attacks to sugarcane. Pig swine was introduced. Dengue fever was introduced. Hundreds of kids died. 181 kids, I think, or 81 kids, excuse me. But anyhow, getting back to this part, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This Operation Northwoods, if you look that up, it documents all what we're talking about here in U.S. documents. Not somebody interpreting what they said or whatever, but actually photocopying the documents and saying, look, this is what they said, this is what they did. Anyhow, this creating a false justification was another deal. And this Operation Northwoods was to be operated by the U.S. military. That's not good. This is actually a copy of the document. write and I can send you these documents, but so they were developed as ways to trick the American public, hijacking planes, blowing up a U.S. ship, sending up a drone plane and saying a bunch of Americans died when Cuba shot it down and there really wasn't anybody. All of these things were part of these different plans that we're talking about under the Northwoods. This is that fake civilian aircraft shoot down I was just alluding to. This is an aircraft with passengers would secretly land at the U.S. military base. A drone would then be destroyed over Cuba in a way that places the blame on the Cuban fighter aircraft. Again, this is, you can see this is from Harper Magazine back in 2001. This is the John Glenn deal that I was just alluding to. So we will go by that. Here's just some of the biological attacks against Cuba. Infectious agents, sugarcane, African swine fever, this dengue fever that killed 158 people, including 101 children. This is, they had, like, they don't even cover some of the other things. All of these biological deals. And so you wonder, like, well, how do you know it was the U.S.? Here's a guy in 1984, Aracino, he testified to having introduced germs into Cuba as part of the U.S. biological war against Cuba and affirming that the dengue outbreak that killed a bunch of people was introduced by terrorist groups on the island. So there's all of this terrorist activity coming from Florida, and allowing it, and we were actually paying it. You and I were paying for it. Our taxpayers' money was paying for it. A couple of days before, meanwhile, all of this is trying to destabilize this government. They can't feed the people. Then this will happen. They blew up this department store. Cuba lost over 3,500 people to various terrorist acts up into the 2000s, early 2000s. We lost, what, 3,000 at 9/11. They lost even more. And theirs came from, sadly to say, from were launched from our mainland. So anyhow, getting to the Bay of Pigs thing here. I'm going to show you a couple maps, but originally the plan was to go a little bit farther south from the Bay of Pigs on the island because there was the Escambray Mountains, and they felt like if they couldn't hold the land, the beachhead, they could go up in the mountains and continue the guerrilla movement or whatever. But that all got changed, and they eventually changed it to the Bay of Pigs location, which we'll see in just a second. Okay. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the idea was to launch a beachhead. You land on the beachhead, you hold it for 3 days. You declare a provisional government. The U.S. and the OAS nations recognize it, and in comes all this military might. That was the plan. Okay. This actually is Trinidad. This is, and you can see the Escambray Mountains are behind there. So this is where the landing originally was for. Here's a deal here. I'm going to just point here, but these were the two main beaches. Playa Girón, and then you can see inside the bay, the main Playa Larga, and that was where the majority of the 1,500 invading force landed. Okay. Here's another picture. So here you got, I don't know if you can see it, but in the lower left-hand corner is, can someone pronounce that city in Guatemala, Retalier or something like that? That's where these guys were originally trained by the CIA at. Then they moved, they got kicked out actually at Guatemala, and they moved to Nicaragua. And you can see Puerto Cabezas, excuse me. And that's where they launched the original flights on April 15th. So they had to travel some distance. In other words, if they would have launched those airplanes from Florida, that's just 90 miles. And they could have stayed there and circled and bombed, but they launched them from so far away that they could only, once they reached the Cuban mainland to do their bombing and bomb these airfields, they could only stick around for, I think, about an hour or two, because they just didn't have enough gas to get all the way back. So anyhow, that's kind of one of the things here. And here again, this is a map just to show you. This is Trinidad down here. You can't see it, but this is Trinidad. These are those mountains. And then up there is where the Bay of Pigs is. Okay. About plan. So, Susan, that's my computer. That's not. I'll tell you what. It's going to. Protect on the tree. Steve, are you still? Oh. That's not good. So, yeah. We still have more videos on this too. That's. Got some cheese and crackers and some. So. Give it a second.
Hey, can you turn the screen off?
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Hey, so let me do this. I'm going to you're certainly behind me here. I can see it from here. And let me just
Cheese.
Yeah, I don't know.
okay.
Could be.
Don't breathe.
Wanted.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sit over here. We're gonna run through this stuff, so I appreciate you bearing with me here.
There are already two
Okay,
videos.
so this is our last, that's the last slide. So this is kind of the whole theater, if you will.
One you want.
The airports that they attacked on the 15th were three of them. One in the Havana area, the outskirts, another was over in the eastern end of the island, which was in Santiago de Cuba. Okay? So that was the 15th, as we've already said. And the attacks were repelled with some planes from the Cuban Defense Force destroyed. So people lost some of their planes. They had those decoy planes I was mentioning to you as well that were lost. But basically, there were very minimal Air Force of less than a dozen planes, literally, was mainly still in force. So the goal to render that the Air Force useless failed. Okay? It's really interesting when you read the stories about guys. One guy jumped into a plane in his, in his underwear. I mean, it's just kind of like reading a type of deals. This one guy, his name was Eduardo Garcia Delgado. He had just been recently trained. He was a young guy on their artillery. They just received Czechoslovakian anti-aircraft artillery within the week. And they were scrambling to try to learn. They knew the attack was coming. And they were scrambling on how, it's like us trying to defend somebody else. And then two of us learn how to use the artillery. And the next day we're training someone else on how to use the artillery. Okay. And then you have one of these guys, his name is Eduardo Garcia Delgado. He gets shot up in one of these bombing raids. And as he's dying, he writes in his blood on this door inside the building he was at, the name Fidel, and the next day there was a huge demonstration on the 17th, on the 16th, one day after this deal. And his brother actually has the door with Fidel with the blood, in the deal here. Here's kind of a picture of this anti-aircraft artillery talking about. Okay. Meanwhile, here's a picture of an incoming B-26.
We're not seeing it.
Ed Pros again.
And then, yeah, well, I don't know what to tell you. We just keep stopping and try to do this thing over here online. This one's well, so to get this artillery, I'm just gonna, are y'all okay with me just
Talking.
sure, it's kind of, it's like a bedtime sleep. You don't want to sleep. And yeah, so this artillery gunnery that they've got. People I didn't see this picture here, but if you want to come over here, you can see it. It's one of these B-26 bombers. This is the Air Force. This guy, Eduardo Garcia Delgado. It's a picture here of the airport that was bombed. And then there's a picture of his brother holding the deal. The next day, the demonstration on the 16th. At the end of the day, so April 17th, okay, there's some 1,300 exiles. They land at the beds. They're using U.S. weapons. They were told that they would get the support amongst the local population, but they got in fact, local militias met them and held them off somewhat until get to location. And so again, the picture here of they had two types of airplanes. Cuba did. A T-33 was kind of a jet, and it had two 50 caliber M3 machine guns, and they were used to intercept the airplanes in the air. with the landing, they also had these Sea Furies. They were UK planes, which carried more missiles and bombs with their propeller airplanes, and they were designed for like attacking ships and such. And the Sea Fury planes, of course, were slower than the T-33 jets, but had much greater speed and maneuverability than the B-26 bombers that the exiles were flying in on. Yeah. Then there's just a picture of Fidel at the front here. You can see them. And then this is one of the pilots. One of the pilots is kind of Gatos, and he gets to see one of those Sea Furies. He has no combat experience, but he's the most experienced pilot. This is what Cuba had as T-33s were so in Sea Furies, they had automatic starters, but they would not start the planes. So the mechanics had to start. You remember those old movies where they get up on the propeller and they would just boom like that, and then they would start. This is what they were doing to get their planes going. I mean, that's the kind of and the engines without existing temperatures, and sometimes flame out, they crash on takeoff. So one of these T-33s was parted out to catch up another, and then they started naming the planes Homeland and Death, and unfortunately, I think there's probably some less. But anyhow, this pilot, I did 7 missions in the Sea Fury, sunk one of the ships at the Bad Pigs and shot down 2 of the B-26 bombers. As you move on, there's some pictures in here of ammo on the Sea Furies to get them back up in the air and such. But just going back to the April 15th, we were bombing these 3 airports. Not only did Cuba hide their planes, but they also, like I mentioned earlier, rolled out old non-working planes to make it look like those were planes to attack. So somehow they were able to salvage a lot of their Air Force and limited Air Force. It's really a pretty amazing story. They only had, 8 or 10 planes. Another guy, 14, was in T-33. Shot down 3 26s. So anyhow, there's like 17, 18, 19 of non-stop missions. 26 bombers were shot down. 2 ships were sunk, the Houston and the Morocco. The Morocco was their lead ship. And some of these guys refused to debark from this deal because there's such heavy fire and resistance from the Cuban forces and such. On the flip side, you had these fearless Cubans. I mean, they're putting their, I don't know if what struck me when I was going through all this stuff was, you remember the movie The Godfather? They're in Cuba, and Michael Corleone sees some guy, Cuban revolutionary, grab some captain and dive into a car and pulled a grenade and killed him off. He put his own knife on him. That type of everything on the line type of thing. It was just a different fervor and fighting force feeling I wanted to share with you on that. Anyhow, these 2 ships were sunk. 3 landing crafts were sunk. The planes and their missions allowed cover from Cuban revolutionary troops that were on the march, and they had some tanks down there. So if you were over here, you could see this picture of a tank. This guy here, which you can't see, but you could, was a friend of mine. I met him at the Bay of Pigs. He was my age, so he was alive. He was happy, and he was explaining that, the planes came from here, and the forces came up this room, and this is what we did. And blah, 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 blah. So it's pretty first-hand primary information. At the end of the day, there's a museum out there, and they explain how cattle was won in 66 hours 156,000 included. We're talking about the Cuban forces, the Cuban Revolutionary Forces. JFK's advisor, Arthur Schlesinger, he said the reality was that Fidel Castro turned out to be a more formidable foe in command of a far better organized regime than anyone had supposed. His patrol spotted the invasion was the first possible moment. His plans reacted with speed and vigor. His police eliminated any chance of sabotage or rebellion behind the lines. The soldiers stayed loyal and fought hard. He himself never panicked, and if faults were chargeable to him, they were his overestimate of the strength of the invasion and undue caution in pressing the ground attack against the beachhead. His performance was impressive. And, in a letter excerpt from Arthur Schlesinger of October 19th, 92, he talks about that canceled airstrike. He says, I'm sure that the cancellation of the airstrike is much overrated as a factor in the outcome. Castro had dispersed his planes after the first strike. Canceling the last strike made no great difference. There should still have been a tiny invading force facing 200,000 or so of Castro's army uprising behind the lines of the invasion force. He goes on to say that Dulles probably catalyzed the regulation eventually when the invasion faltered. The project was a terrible idea, doomed from the start to finish, or so it seems to me. Then there's just a picture of the USS Essex, which was off the coast in international waters, and a few of the Douglas Air Force Skyhawks that were available. And then really just had to do with some pictures of the downing of the Houston in the Bay of Pigs and the signs, which were really pretty powerful, indicating that this was the first defeat of Western imperialism in the history of the world in the Bay of Pigs. It's really something that we're very, very proud of. That really is it. All I really have. I wanted to, I'm sorry you didn't see all the pictures over the best part. Instead of listening to me, but I wanted to go ahead and open it up for any questions, comments, or your own reflections.
Is that PowerPoint available?
Yeah, this PowerPoint will be on the website, which we will make available to everyone. Yes.
How many folks in the Kennedy cabinet actually denounced this later?
I'm sorry, say again.
How many of the Kennedy cabinet members actually denounced this later?
I'm not so sure, but I know that Schlesinger was one of his closest aides, and I think from the very get-go, JFK was he was not going to use American forces. He didn't want the U.S. hand to be shown, and he was promised that would not be needed. And but I'm not so sure. I'm not familiar. I'm sure there's opinions and there's statements by a number of cabinet people. The only ones that I found of interest was Schlesinger's.
Here has been to Cuba. I would encourage people to go. Pedro and I have a fantastic contact in Havana, who's a great guide. You can go via
Recording in progress.
Okay, you can go via Cancun. Yeah, the Cubans do not stamp your passport. It's no muss, no fuss.
Yeah.
And as Pedro said, they love American citizens. You'd have a great time. They desperately need an infusion of funds because of the embargo. Everybody else in the world goes there. The Europeans, Australians, anyway, I would just encourage them.
Yeah, I went several times with groups to make it totally legal. And then with the radio deal, I went down there as a journalist a couple of times. And if you go through Cancun, when you come back, the main thing is you don't ever want to falsify an information. That's a felony. If they ask you on a piece of paper, where are you coming from? Where, or you just don't want to lie on it. That gets you into more trouble than anything else.
That's a felony.
Yeah, it's a felony of misrepresentation.
To the 1,000 prisoners at Castro, all the
Yeah.
exiles that basically got captured.
Yeah, they were released for some $56 million in medical aid stuff within about a year or so. Yeah, there was a lot of prisoners that were taken. There's only a couple of hundred deaths. They just got it handed to them and gave up pretty quick. So there was a bunch of prisoners.
So these were more the exiles where they, it looks like from your dad, it was for the wealthy landowners, etc.
Yeah, you don't want to say like it was all the wealthy landowners, but those stats that Jane Franklin got together was basically just open source stuff. All the people that were there, and then you go back and you look at what they land they owned and stuff. They really fought for what they wanted. I mean, there's to go to fight and to go in, they have passions too. I just think that they're,
Seems like our companies. I mean, we watched a documentary on the U.S. involvement in Hawaii early on.
yeah.
And it seems like we did to Cuba what we did to Hawaii and their native peoples as well.
Yeah.
We basically just took all their resources.
So Hawaiians got to keep more of their land though.
Well,
They got
had
to
to
keep
fight
it
for it.
alive.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting because I don't want to sound too simplistic or not, but at the end of the day, what you'll be able to find as we get this thing, we're launching this library of information of archival, but you can go to I'm really glad you brought that up because you can go to all of these different vignettes and there's so many similarities. If you go to these different, you hate to speak so negatively about our foreign policy, but the abject truth is it's terrible. We end up, we support very, very wealthy interests. These people, think of our own country. The king taxed us out the kazoo. Wouldn't let us, they took our land and guys got together and says, no, this is not working. We need to revolt against this, and we did, and we did. And we weren't called communists. We were called fighting unfairness, give me liberty or give me death.
Only because
We
they
had the
want.
same kinds of passions, right?
Only because they want.
And they did win for sure. But I think that's a good analogy to think about that, and where I was going was that you can measure the welfare of the majority population by life expectancy, infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, education, nutritional standards, all of these things. And you can look at these countries that, like in Guatemala, under these governments before we overthrew it, they're building schools, they're building all of these health clinics and all of these things. We see it, I see it in Nicaragua and stuff. And our number one issue in this country for so many people is immigration. And when you promote policies like that in south of the border, you create unlivable conditions for people and they will leave. They're just like if I was a parent and I had kids and there were death squads and all this stuff going on, I'm going to get out of there, that type of thing. So it really does behoove us to I think, examine those. And that's what we want to do. We're not in any way anti anything. We're anti-wrong and we're right. What's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. And then just kind of getting that out there and then showing the before and after types of things in some of these countries really starts to create some insights that are important.
Obama kind of loosened the certain aspects of the embargo for a brief time in Cuba.
Yeah.
What type of impact was that
Yeah.
on all the Cubans?
I was down there during that time, and there was a lot of people were very positive about it. The real revolutionaries, they were very doubtful about Obama. They felt like it was just, well, the embargo is not working. We're going to overthrow your government, and the embargo is not working. So let's try another way by opening up travel, by opening up diplomatic relations. I mean, there were some significant changes, but.
Perfection is the enemy of the good, and you can't expect any U.S. president that got elected after the millions and billions of dollars it takes for him to get there. To never say, "Hey, man, everything's cool, go there."
I should get credit for what he did. I'm just saying that it was not really revolutionarily different, in many fundamental ways. The embargo is still firmly in place, and
But they could send the monetary amount you could send down there was different, and that can't hurt.
yeah,
Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily help them in the long run, but momentarily,
Yeah.
it made their lives a little better for people that
it's
actually receive
substantially better for a lot of people. There's no doubt. But also, Les, we were spending tens of millions of dollars a year during that period to go into Cuba, infiltrate. In fact, I had an interview with two women that were double agents. They were Cubans that pretended to be bought off by the U.S. interest section. We didn't have an embassy, it was an interest section. They were getting money from the interest, getting money, all of this money, and they were getting. They were going around the island trying to find pictures that would make Cuba look bad, like maybe kids running up trying to beg. And I was in Cuba a bunch of times. I will tell you, it's a very, very poor country. But the kids, they run around, you can see they're healthy. They're not, riddled with, all of this other stuff. But getting back to this double agent thing, they had videos, they had all of this stuff of our U.S. government giving monies in order to try to overthrow their elected government, their government as such. So this is, throughout the Obama period, we were still trying to fundamentally undermine their deal. If we get caught doing, or some Russian gets caught taking money from the Russian government to try to create a political party in our country to elect somebody that will try to overthrow this or that or whatever, we have laws against that. So I guess that's what I'm saying, is that there was a lot of continued efforts to subvert the government. It's just not something, international laws against that. I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah, Mark.
How much support has decreased from Russia to Cuba since Russia is now going through economic hardships?
Yeah. Well, famously in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they lost everything. And the U.S. turned up the screws on the embargo. And that's called the special period. People lost incredible amounts of weight and stuff, but somehow they still continued to get those basics kind of done. I guess, we come from a different culture. I mean, I do. I won't speak for you, but I never had to worry about where my next meal was coming from and all that kind of stuff, and come from a material world and stuff. And so even during the peaks and the special periods, you know, their life expectancy started going down, their infant mortality rate started going up, but compared to the rest of the hemisphere and stuff, they still were at the very, very, very top. I'm not sure what, you know, now they get a lot of, as Kent mentioned, a lot of revenue comes from tourism. Probably the most they get is from some of their biotechnology. They have, with the embargo, what it meant is that they couldn't get vaccines from the United States. They couldn't get all these medicines. So Fidel in the 80s says, look, we're going to have to start creating this stuff ourselves. And they now got vaccinations for 10 different childhood diseases, and they've gotten some notorious anti-carcinogenic inventions. They've got, that's what I mentioned briefly, that I actually went to their center of immunology. They are notorious for having some of the leading scientists that are almost at par with the US and some of the Western nations in some of these areas from creating their gas. So I think they get some revenue from that.
But don't forget that the Cubans have sent doctors around the world to give medical assistance in foreign countries.
They do it for free.
Yeah. Well, mostly for free, but sometimes for barter
Well, sure.
and stuff and such. Yeah. And us in this country, what our policy was to stigmatize that, to try to get these doctors that went to these countries to get out of Cuba. Here, come to the United States. Don't do that. Come over here, and all of these different types of deals. I mean, it's just like, you know, I think the Cubans said if the West is so much against us doing all this medical aid to all of these other nations, and we're talking about, you know, 160 nations have probably been touched in one way or another from all that.
You had to set up a nonprofit to go get medical aid in foreign places instead of your government doing it in themselves. There's something major wrong there, like, you know, the Doctors Without Borders and other things like that, where you've got dentists that have been going down to Central America for, you know, 40, 50, 60 years to give free dental care and everything, doing missions. And our government doesn't help them get there and do their job, that job. It basically makes the United States out to be heartless.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much because our foreign policy has been heartless.
No, I think that's true. I think just one more thing on that is just I think it was around 2000. There's a what's called a Human Development Index, right? That's how you can compare countries to countries to see how the majority of populations doing. The higher the human development, and that's, you know, not just literacy, it's education, it's access to nutrition and that type of thing. And Cuba ranks really high. They also have another thing. It's a ecological footprint. You know, they went through this huge reforestation program, and they actually, you know, and this is the world. Y'all can email me if you want, but I can get you the exact date. I'm not sure what the exact year, but I think it was 2000 that they were the only country that had a negative footprint. You know, along with having the HDI levels that they had and such. So there's a lot of, you know, when I don't want to sound like just raving about this country, but when I was down there, it was like every day or two, there was a new international conference on something huge that was pretty important to humanity. You know, I went to one of their deals on for a few days and one of my visits or whatever. So even people that don't even speak Spanish, you know, had access if you just paid the fee and that type of thing. But they have a number of they're just known internationally for pursuing areas on behalf of developing nations that make them kind of a beacon of hope for a lot of countries. Yes.
I was trying to figure out in my head, trying to remember the timeline between Bay of Pigs and then the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
It all happened in the brief period of
Yeah.
Kennedy's presidency. And I was wondering, were there impacts or noted impacts from the result of the Bay of Pigs that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis as we call it?
That we talked about Operation Mongoose. That was actually post Bay of Pigs. So after the Bay of Pigs was defeated, our government developed Operation Mongoose, which was an ultimate invasion of Cuba, to continue to attack Cuba. On the basis of that, Cuba, as you know, brought missiles, allowed missiles to come into Cuba. So arguably, they're bringing in missiles not for offensive purposes, but really to be a deterrent. I think is a more. Cuba's not going to, invade another the United States. It's just not even feasible. So, and of course, Khrushchev denied that there was any missiles in Cuba, and Adlai Stevenson, our UN, says, well, look, our UN ambassador says, look at these pictures. I think that's important because that was classified information, those U2 pictures. And I don't know how many times I've heard in the most current types of interventions that we're involved in that we know such and such a country is doing this and that, but we can't tell you because it's classified. Well, they would tell us if they had it. I mean, is what I'm suggesting. That when they have it, they throw it on the table in the General Assembly of the UN. I think that's a really good example of doing that. So whenever you hear, John Kirby, National Security Advisor guy, saying, "Well, we can't tell you that because it's top secret, it's classified." I would suggest that these if they had the dirty deed on in real evidentiary manner, they would show it to us in most cases.
Well, don't forget, the whole missile situation was after, correct me if I'm wrong, Fidel and I think Shea went to New York City, went to the United States. And in the spirit of Lincoln and hoping for support for the People's Revolution, which of course the door was slammed in their face, and all they were getting was attacks and attempts on Fidel's life. And so Soviet Union was happy to step in.
If Fidel had just taken that Yankees contract.
Well, he's actually.
Do you think that the Russians would have moved to another country if we hadn't?
Well, I think
Cuba with our actions. Well, with the failure of the Bay of Pigs, we've made an enemy, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that opens a door for and another one of our enemies to move in there.
Yeah.
Is the suspicion. But if the Bay of Pigs had never happened and we had never gotten into this political wall between us and Cuba, would Russia have moved to another country with their missiles? I mean, they were obviously trying to counter missiles we had in Europe.
I think the whole missile crisis was about the imminent invasion of Cuba by the U.S. You have all that documentation in the Operation Mongoose and such. I think just after the Bay of Pigs, we have never stopped trying to overthrow the Cuban government. Today, we're doing what we've always done. And you have UN votes since 92, that you have, 98% of the countries of the world saying this is absolutely wrong. And the United States by itself, or maybe with Israel, are the only nays. The whole world sees that a country should have the right to do what it wants, as long as it's not messing with your country. But so I really think that is, no matter, and that's why, that was Castro's position. We're not going to bargain our autonomy. What we decide to do as a country, we're going to decide to do. We're going to do it on, whatever you think about Castro, you can look. at the majority population's quality of life again, before, after, and now. And that's where that support comes from.
Isn't perhaps the lifting of the embargo and having that go away? I think that would probably change the politics over time in Cuba itself. Because, you know, as our hardliners start dying off here, and hopefully their children don't pick up the same torch, that's going to change things here as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, if you just automatically or suddenly lift an economic embargo on a country, I mean, it's almost like, if you do it, it's almost like putting them in the ecstasy at that point. And too many bad things can happen. So, I mean, you've got to watch what you wish for.
Well, I don't, when you open up all of that, markets and all of that, I mean, Cubans love American goods. What they would do for a hamburger, you know, they love hamburger, you know, that kind of thing. You know, the Rolling Stones have been down there. You know, they love so much of the cultural music of other countries as well, but they have their own as well. So there's a lot to be said that if you opened up the economy, there would just be more and more U.S. And of course, again, Cuba's not going to allow that type of penetration to be manifest itself in creating political parties that are getting paid from outside countries or those types of things.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's a good question. But yeah, I mean, that just to get back to those double agents I was talking about, if you can imagine these people, these two women, and Ricardo, you can maybe help me out with this. You're still here. But we have a video of this interview I did with them. And think about this. If you were a double agent, and you know what that means is your families in Cuba, these revolutionary families, are thinking that their son or daughter has gone to the dark side, to the U.S. side, and is part of these taking that money and trying to overthrow a government that, you know, they were invested in or whatever and stuff like that. Over 15 years, their families thought they were spies when they weren't. They were double agents. They were infiltrating. They got videotapes. They got all sorts of documentary information to show that no, it's not just someone claiming all this money is going in there to subvert the economy and to create opposition in civil society and to pay for it and to generate it, you know, generate an opposition that's not there and pay them so much money that they would just, you know, line up to maybe take some of that money and, you know, do that type of thing. So anyhow, that was a very interesting insight for me to hear them speak about that. What else? Thank you for being here. Yes.
That's all the. Oh, so you're right. We need to move things back. Thank you. Where's that?
Yeah, it's this man, we don't.